really want to be like. I'm supposed to have to. So. The higher one was really. I was right. I figured I should find some. I should be something else. Like feedback back on the spot. Just
I'm going to need to fine tune this a little bit. The whole Zoom and PowerPoint interaction here. Takes a little bit of time. So, that should do it. So welcome. I am really excited to be doing this class. This is a first time thing for me, and you know, I have never heard of another class like this being offered. So I hope you find it really helpful. So this is a course that is intended to do a few things. It's intended to, you know, confirm, I guess, whether, when, and to where you might wish to apply to PhD programs. It's intended to help guide you through that process and to look beyond it as well. And the reason that I'm offering this class is that I crave impact in my teaching, and I am hopeful that this class can make a real difference for many, hopefully all of you. And you know, the way that I think of it is that you know, the differences between, you know, a good outcome and a not so good outcome, you know, in looking for the right PhD situation, you know, could be the difference between, you know, on one hand, you know, thriving in graduate school, you know, becoming a highly successful scientist, making great discoveries, mentoring lots of new scientists during your career, versus either, you know, not getting in, maybe because you didn't have the right information about how to go about this process, or ending up in a situation that you're not so thrilled with, and maybe, you know, looking for the next convenient off-ramp. And so I see this as a course that, you know, can hopefully make a big difference at the individual level, and also, you know, in kind of the bigger picture for science, you know, do a little bit toward kind of strengthening the you know, the pipeline of training new scientists, because I think that this link between undergraduate study and advancing to PhD study can be kind of a, you know, a leaky bit of that pipeline. So let's see. I'm just trying to switch modes here on my PowerPoint and make sure the recording is looking the way I want it to. Good. Okay. So I am recording classes at the same time as I am hosting them here. But at the same time, as I mentioned, to those of you who arrived early, in-person attendance is one part of the grade for this course, to make sure that we can have the discussion that can help this class be as successful as possible. You're welcome to contact me in advance, if there are specific reasons, health or otherwise, why you can't make it to a specific class. And if that is the case, then I'll make sure it's not held against you grade-wise. So we've got the sign-in sheet in back. Hopefully you've all visited that. Yeah, so I am also recording this in part for anyone who does end up missing the class. I am not doing this as a hybrid class, so I'm not, I'd like to focus on you right here and not be worried about whether there's a question in chat. I think, having as much of an in-person community here as we can will be a positive for this course. But I am recording this, and although I don't think anyone else's identities will be clear, I even hope to make these recordings available online for all the people out there who don't have the opportunity to take a course like this. So, I mentioned that, that I'm hopeful that this course can make a difference at the individual level and, a little bit at the big picture level too. And the other motivation that I have for teaching this course is just to share some of the experiences that I've gained over the last several years as our chair of the admissions committee for UW's genetics PhD program. And so this is a committee of, me and 5 other faculty and actually 4 current PhD students from our program. Together we're tasked with sorting through all of the applications that our program receives and ultimately deciding who gets in. And there's other things that go into that, including, feedback from interviews. Just it's the experience of doing that and seeing that, some applicants are clearly very well informed about this process and what we're looking for and, what is needed to get into a PhD program, and others are really not. And so I felt like offering a course like this, maybe I could help with anyone who's not. And I realized that you're all at a very research intensive university, and in some ways that may help. You're talking with people who are kind of in touch with graduate education, and that wouldn't be the case everywhere. For those of you, sitting in this room at the University of Wisconsin. On the other hand, I know from experience that in practice, individual like advising situations can vary even here, and not everyone, has all of the information that they would ideally like to have. So, that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of offering this course. How many of you saw the first announcement that I posted to Canvas? Okay, good. That's pretty high. So one thing I mentioned there is that I want to encourage you to let others know about this course, even though there's technically only a small handful of spots left. I would go beyond the limit of 40 that I initially put on this course. I wasn't sure how many people would try to apply at once, and if I would have to, try to figure out, who to prioritize. We are a little bit under my current limit, and we could definitely, fit more people here. And I want to help as many people as I can. So one thing that I've noticed about the current enrollment is that it's very uneven in terms of like between majors and even between advisors in some cases. So like, I'm a professor in genetics here, and I can tell that, that our genetics and genomics advisors did a good job letting our majors know about this course, because we have a good number of you here. I tried to distribute this information to advisors of a lot of other bioscience majors, and I also even put up some flyers. Anybody see my flyer and learn about the course that way? All right. I'm glad that walk around campus was not wasted. But in terms of other majors, I know that you know, there's one advisor, India Viola, who advises a subset of the neuro majors. I think several of you have India as an advisor. And so like I have a whole cluster of you who are advised by India. And I think either, I think very few, if any, other neuro majors from all the other letters of the alphabet that she doesn't cover. And very few, relatively few bio majors in general, few biochem and micro majors or other bioscience majors really. So if you know other students, seniors especially, who are in those majors, they might not have heard about this course. So if you know seniors who are interested in PhD study, either next year or within the next few years, I would definitely encourage you to, make sure that they're aware of this course. I won't hold it against them that they weren't here today. And, I'm glad just to have this course, benefit as many people as possible. All right. Okay. So what are we going to cover here? You could kind of divide our content into 3 phases. There's like the before, during, and after of applying to PhD programs. So before you apply, we'll start with the question of, is a research PhD program right for you? And, this is the type of bioscience graduate program that we're going to be focusing on in this course. We'll talk a little bit about other steps that could be on the way there, because not everybody has to go right there. But I do want to cover this topic. And, if you end up learning some things about PhD study and you end up deciding, it is actually not for me, it's totally fine to drop the course. And well, that's why to put this at the very beginning, right? Rather than after the drop deadline or something. So we're going to start there. We're going to talk about what biology grad students actually do, and how you can decide which specific field you might like to study, because I know that's a really challenging thing. It's not necessarily something that a standard undergraduate biology curriculum just naturally poises you to do, to figure out like which specific area would you like to spend 5 or 6 of your years of your life researching. And we'll talk a little bit about what sorts of careers you can get to by obtaining a biology PhD. So that's part of this kind of before you apply unit. Another thing that I alluded to before is whether this is the right time to apply for PhD programs. I know that many of you are currently thinking that you'd like to apply to PhD programs like this semester to start next year. And that may well be the right decision for you. But as I will emphasize later on, actually the majority of PhD students coming into our genetics program are not coming directly from their undergraduate degree. Maybe 30 or 40% of them are. But the rest have done something else in between, and we'll talk about different reasons why they might have done that. And actually, in a few weeks, I'm hoping to give you a chance to hear from some of our students directly and have a little panel discussion with them. And we'll talk about how to figure out which programs you should apply to. And part of that will be actually contacting potential advisors that you might work with, either contacting them or like writing the draft of an email that you would send if you were going to apply this year, in case you're planning to do that, a couple years down the road. So we'll cover that as an important step along the way before you apply for programs. The next unit is actually applying for PhD programs. And so we're really going to step through this process. I'm going to try to, give you my, impression as a PhD admissions chair of just what's involved in the whole admission process. What happens after you submit an application to PhD programs? What are the top priorities? What matters a lot? What doesn't matter so much? And I'm going to have a big emphasis on writing the statement of purpose. So this is an important aspect of probably every program's application. This is explaining why you want to do this, why you want to join this PhD program and pursue a PhD in your chosen field. And, I'll tell you right now, that's something that does matter quite a bit. People do read these and consider them carefully. And so, as I'll mention further, I'll actually go through this with you. And, you'll, as part of this course, you'll draft your statement. You'll get first peer feedback, revise it, and then you'll get feedback from me. This is the one thing where, I'm going to, give you a lot of written feedback in this course. I can't do this for every document that might be involved in your application, but I will do it for this one. I'll give you individual feedback on your statement on a time frame before most programs require you to apply by. All right, so we will talk about other application materials as well. The CV is a pretty ubiquitous component. Diversity is a really interesting topic right now, given the recent Supreme Court decision. And I think, there's going to be kind of a changing landscape of what programs are asking for in order to account for, all different priorities, to have diversity in their program in a broad sense. And so, I don't completely know what you'll encounter from program to program on this front, but already before that decision, an increasing number of programs, including ours, did have some type of diversity statement that was called for. And so that's something we'll talk about as well. We'll talk about how to figure out who to ask for letters of recommendation. Because that is an important decision, and there are certain expectations about that might not be 100% obvious to you. And then the last part of the course will be just at the tail end of the semester. We'll get past the typical December 1st application deadline that applies at least to many PhD programs. And we'll still have a couple of class sessions left. So I figured the perfect thing to do was to focus on the interview process, to talk about what that would involve, to try to get you ready for that. And I'm planning to have you do kind of some peer mock interviews amongst yourselves. So that'll be part of what we do at the end of the semester. And the last thing will be just talking about how do you choose, assuming that you've been admitted to multiple PhD programs, how do you decide where to go? And that is a very individual thing, but, I think it can also be illuminating to talk about that as a group. So that's kind of a big picture overview of what we're going to be covering in this course. And there is some coursework involved here, but it really, it really aligns closely with the application process itself and the ideal preparation for doing that. There's not a lot that's really extraneous. I do have online now what I call my entry survey. And so that is due before the next class. It is worth a few points. And then there will be another survey at the end of the class. I certainly encourage you to fill out the university evaluations as well. But for my own record keeping and to really assess how well this class is doing and to be able to document, beginning to ending outcomes, that might even feed into, funding proposals that I might submit. It's really important to have this sort of information from you. One thing that I'm going to ask you to do in the short term is to find someone on this campus to talk to who does research that is pretty close to what you think you'd like to study as a PhD student. And so ideally, this could be a member of the UW faculty. If that doesn't end up being possible, I would allow you to substitute like a postdoctoral researcher or a later stage PhD student in a faculty member's lab. And so the main purpose of this conversation is to talk to someone who really knows that field about where they think are the best places for you to consider applying. Because this is not necessarily something that you can figure out just by looking at a US News top 10 universities list for some field. That doesn't really cut it when you're trying to zero in on a particular research area or trying to figure out which individual faculty are great mentors and that sort of thing. So I'm asking you to at least have that scheduled by 2 weeks from now. Not to have done the meeting by 2 weeks from now, but just to have set it up by 2 weeks from now. And so that could be helpful because it could be a little hard to get on faculty schedules. And then a few weeks after that is when I'm expecting you to submit through Canvas a little written summary of that conversation. There will be a PhD plan reflection, that is getting at, your current thoughts for, how you're feeling about applying for PhD programs, when you think you might want to do it, and where you think you might want to apply. That is kind of toward the end of this first unit after I've done my best to, share as much useful information with you as I can. And one other assignment that goes along with this kind of before you apply unit is to at least write a draft of an email that you could send to potential PhD advisors. So this is a highly recommendable practice before you apply for PhD programs, is to write to faculty you might like to work with. And you can ask on a practical level, like whether they expect to be taking a new graduate student next year. And you can also, talk about why you've developed an interest in that lab's research in particular, and try to get a conversation going about, even what sort of project might be possible in that lab. That comes across really well versus an application just showing up from someone that the professor has never communicated with. So I'm not requiring that you send these messages. I know not everyone might be applying to grad programs this year at all. And it might not make sense to send this email yet if you're not. But if you are, I totally recommend it. But the assignment is just to draft the email and, submit the text through Canvas. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering when that assignment, when it's due?
Yes, it is on the syllabus. It is not until sometime in October. I'm having a hard time remembering exactly when, and I do not want to hop around programs. Maybe somebody has the syllabus open though. Yes. Really? Okay, I will have to fix that. I thought you could. There must be some little slider I have to move. Can you access my slides for today? No. Ah, that's too bad. I uploaded them before class. I'll fix it. I'll find a way. Yep. Sometimes, there's multiple things you have to do to make the content fully accessible on Canvas. And I thought I had done them, but I will look again. So that email is not due for a while. more than a month yet, I would say.
You wouldn't suggest. Sorry, like, as you're talking through this, I have so many questions and I'm kind of.
I mean, you know, the due date, like, which I think is in mid-October, I think that's still a reasonable time to be reaching out. There's nothing wrong with reaching out before that, like even now, or even a month ago. Okay, we can't do that, but you know, I think that timing is still totally reasonable. I definitely still hear from prospective students after that time. But I think, you know, this is, I mean, this is like a month and a half before applications are due. I think that will come across, you know, totally fine, you know, to be writing at that time. But it's a very good question. And I will fix the Canvas issues. So you can see my announcement, but not the files. Okay, I'll fix the file access. All right. I was sure I had made that specific module accessible even that the syllabus is in. All right, I will fix it. Okay, and there will also be an assignment to just submit a list of the people you would ask for letters of recommendation for applying now, you know, if you were applying now, and some of you will. And just, you know, like a sentence or two about why in each case, pretty straightforward. But it's worth giving some thought to, and it's something we'll talk about in class. And I mentioned this kind of multi-step process that we'll take to really, you know, delve into the statement of purpose and to, you know, really try to help you have something you're very happy with by the time you apply. So that will involve submitting an initial draft, getting feedback from 2 others in this course, revising it, and then getting my feedback. And I'm planning to have some mock interviews here and some brief written feedback based on that. And so that's the extent of the assignments here. And I've really tried to focus on things that are directly relevant to, you know, planning for PhD applications, you know, laying the groundwork and actually doing the applications and being ready for what would come next. All right, so this is probably a good time to take a little break from hearing me talk. I think you already know who I am. My name's John Poole. I'm a professor here in genetics, and I've explained kind of why I'm here, but I would love to hear more about why each of you are here. You know, please, you know, tell me your name, you know, a topic that you think right now that you might like to research in graduate school, and just anything else you care to mention about what you're most looking forward to about this course. And just to be unpredictable, I'm going to start at the back, up in this corner, if that's okay. Great, thank you. Great, thank you. Perfect. Let's go down one row, right in front of Ellen. Mhm. Great. Mhm. Yeah, okay, thank you. Mhm. Excellent, yes. Mhm. Mhm. Great, yes.
So I'm Lewis. I am working in the snow group of the department. I'm also research assistant. And that's pretty much it. And I'm also looking forward to
Mhm. All right, yes. Hmm. Okay, thank you. Yes. Mhm. Excellent. Yeah. Mhm.
Hi, I'm Liv. I work in Tom Friedrich's lab here. We study the evolution of pandemic RNA viruses. Some of you might know SARS. My current project is with Zika virus, analyzing the phenotype of specific viral genotype. So I do a lot of reverse genetics and also a lot of genetics. So I want to go into a virology grad school program, and I want big data. I want biostatistics. I want all of it. So I'm most excited to like meet up with like
Yeah, I hope that that'll be a neat thing about being in this class is just to kind of concentrate a bunch of you who are interested in PhD study. But I also, I'm really enjoying the variety of interests here. And, you know, I checked and some of you had already filled out the pre-survey, and I was enjoying the pie chart that Google Forms showed me of, like, you know, all the different areas that, you know, you've chosen so far for what you want to do. Yeah. Mhm.
And then, specific.
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. All right, thank you. It's down here. Mhm.
I know what you're seeing around, you're studying. That's something.
Uh-huh. Definitely a recurring theme there. Yes. Mhm. In the red, yeah. Mhm. All right. Yes. Mhm.
I'm worried, for grad school, student programs that focus on bioinformatics and computational biology as one of the treatment programs. So it's kind of those practices.
Mhm. Great. Mhm.
I'm Betty, and I was so structure and also like the
I skipped a row, didn't I? Sorry. Go ahead. Mhm. All right. Thank you. And sorry, I lost track a little bit. We can go back up a row there.
I'm Maggie, I'm also working. One, I think also one area that seeing is I think also.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, we can continue along this row and then we'll come back. Okay. Yes.
My name's Nick. I will be here next month.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's kind of my field too. And hopefully, that puts me in a decent position to talk about, very different types of graduate programs. This field kind of keeps me in touch with the more molecular side of biology and the more biodiversity side of biology. But it's definitely a challenge to try to, speak to such, a broad array of programs, but hopefully I can do something. Yes. Mhm. All right. Mhm. All right. Mhm.
And people to
Yes. Okay, come down to this row again now.
So I went and looked at ophthalmology's leading center, which is looking at AI as a way to help diagnose macular degeneration.
Mhm.
And the Brain Research Center, which looks at behavioral neuroscience. I'm hoping to do graduate school in behavioral neuroscience, and also to Brain Research Center. And I'm looking forward to some application process.
Great. Yes. Mhm.
I'm Sean. Not really sure what I want to research. Interested in neuroscience, studying topics in there. I'm mostly kind of looking forward to, narrowing down the interests and finding programs.
Mhm. All right. Yes.
My name is Mark. I work in Melanie Foley's lab, so mostly with consciousness and clinical and meditative data analysis. For grad school, I'm interested in doing some sort of neuroscience field, probably one of the cognitive behavioral direction, starting with the idea of doing something computational as well, so I'm not really sure. I guess I'm most excited for figure out whether I'm applying this year or next year.
Yep. All right.
My name is Palmer. I previously worked in prostate cancer lab, so for the oncogenetics, so cancer stem cells.
Mhm.
I'm currently in the Amon lab here, which I'm building melanoma mouse models for immunosuppressed patients and working on PLK1 condition. In terms of what I'm looking forward to in grad school, I have two very distinct interests, which is like biomimetic design and computational design. It's kind of technical skill set, but also focusing on cancer biology. So they're kind of two very different things. Also, metagenomics, if you're interested in. But yeah, in this class, I think, as people have said, like demystifying the application process for sure, but also gaining more insights into what I want to do as well. And finding a balance between like theoretical and technical.
All right. And now, since I had mixed things up a little bit, we can go down here and across the front row. Yeah.
I'm James. There's a few kind of broad things I'd be interested in grad school.
one being like memory in the brain and neuroplasticity, things like that. Or kind of like systems of things in the brain, so like circuitry. But then also involved with the like sociological phenomena in the brain. It's they call that and it's like identity. Each other. I think the thing that I'm most looking forward to is that I know grad school always seemed like something that was so far away in the future and something right now senior year coming going to go through. So I'm very excited to know what I'm doing. Yeah. Okay.
I'm Holly. I work in a couple labs on campus and I had like a really huge research interest for grad school. It's like neuromodulation in humans, looking at psychiatric disorders from like an immune system.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. And I guess I'm most interested in figuring out what PIs would even work with that, or like, yeah, basically setting up those like.
Yes. All right, and
I'm Kiri, I want to research methodology and I'm just here just to
okay. Thank you, everyone. It's nice to get, a sense of the range of interests here and begin to get to know you a little bit. I can kind of hear, echoes of what I'd noticed about like which advisors were most proactive about distributing, the course info, like here in genetics and also on the neuro side. And so really glad to have you all here. All right, so what I put on the syllabus for today's topic, granted you haven't seen the syllabus, but I wanted to take the rest of the time today to just, talk a little bit about, what is actually involved in being a PhD student. And so I decided to begin by giving our own genetics program that I'm most familiar with as an example, but I will talk a little bit about variation from this that you might find depending on the field and the particular situation that you're in. So in this particular PhD program, our first year students, they start out doing research in the context, most of them are starting out doing lab rotations. So this is spending a short time in each of a few labs. I'll say more about lab rotations in a moment. And then during the first year, they would join their PhD lab, probably one of the labs that they rotated in. And alongside these lab rotations and getting their thesis research started in their new lab, they would also take some classes. So, maybe only about half of the number of credits that you would take as an undergraduate, because they're also maybe putting in 20 or maybe even 30 hours a week in the lab. And so, that's kind of the first year, in addition to some other introductory things. In the second year, they would continue doing research in the lab that they joined. They would take some additional classes. They would be a teaching assistant, a TA, in either the fall or the spring semester. And at the end of their second year, often in the summer, they would write and defend their thesis research proposal, kind of like setting the course for the rest of their PhD. So this is 2 years in, and the average time to degree in our program is probably about 6 years. So it can range, it could be 5, it could be 6, it can be more. But, in these first 2 years, there is some coursework, although, less than as an undergrad. But actually, that's pretty much it. There's basically no more coursework after the second year. So I want to make sure everyone realizes that being a grad student is primarily, at least, in a PhD program, it's primarily not about taking courses. There is some meaningful coursework these first couple of years. But after that, our students are basically focusing on their research, building up toward their full thesis. And then, I mentioned the average time to degree was about 6 years. And so, maybe during the 6th year, they might write and defend their PhD dissertation. And so, that's a typical time course for our own genetics program specifically. But the situation does vary considerably among fields. And so, depending on the field or the particular situation, students in a particular program might TA a few times, or they might even TA every semester that they're a PhD student. That does happen. It doesn't happen in this program specifically, but at other programs on this campus, it might and does. And so it depends, partly on the funding environment. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a bit. Partly on the individual student interest, like whether they want to gain more teaching experience during their graduate study. So that's one way in which this sort of template might differ. Another way is that the coursework is variable. There's probably at least some coursework in any course of PhD study, but some programs have a defined core curriculum, like a few required courses. Some actually don't have any because they're so broad that their students don't necessarily have, particular set of interests in common. Another thing that varies is this issue of lab rotations. So the alternative to having lab rotations is that a PhD student might be admitted directly into a lab. So I would say that lab rotations are most common on the more molecular side of the biological sciences. So these programs often have the resources to support students for anywhere from 1 month to 3 months in each of a few different labs. And so in our particular program, our rotations are, and I think more broadly on UW's campus, rotations here tend to be very short, like only 4 weeks long. So students are settling in their PhD labs by December. And they're not really meant to get a lot done. They're meant to get a taste of what it's like to be in that lab and, work with that advisor and see if it seems like a good fit. In other places, I've talked to students who, at the very end of their first year of being a PhD student are still doing lab rotations. So length does vary, but also whether students do rotations varies as well. And even in these more molecular programs, there might be, some students who are admitted kind of at the program level and do rotations before choosing a lab. And there might be other programs there might be other students who are admitted directly into a particular lab. And there can be different reasons for this. A particular student might be very focused on a lab from the get-go, and that might be clear from their application. Or, it might be more funding oriented, like the program has certain resources available and they can admit a certain number of students. But if a faculty member has the funding and wishes to direct admit a specific student, that might also be allowed. Doing rotations or not doing rotations does vary for that sort of reason, even within these programs. But I would say that in other areas of biology, including like ecology and evolution type programs, the tradition is very much direct admission. Frankly, there aren't usually the resources available at the program level to support rotations. And the tradition is more that students, apply to, and have probably been in contact with specific faculty and they're admitted to a particular lab. So this is more of a across the board, direct admission sort of situation. And this is kind of, this also kind of relates to the question of funding for grad school. One thing I want to emphasize is that, in PhD programs, funding should generally be covered for you, like, one way or another, whether it's, support as a research assistant, from your advisor's grant, or a teaching assistant, or some other funding mechanism. There should be a way to cover your funding, both, your living allowance, and covering your tuition and your health insurance. And you should feel free to ask about these things if it's not clear, like from the program website. I once, hired an undergraduate for a paid position in my lab, and he went on to do research in the lab. Anyway, when he first joined my lab, this was a very talented student, really bright student. But when they joined the lab, they said to me, I'd love to do grad school, but I don't see how I could possibly afford it. So they even though, like, they were a couple years in at UW-Madison, they didn't realize that you don't have to pay to get a PhD. Now, financial situations can still vary, like if you're trying to live in, Manhattan or San Francisco on a PhD stipend, well, the stipends might be somewhat higher there, but still, you might have to be a little more careful about your money. But, generally speaking, that shouldn't really be a big issue. And I think, student loans should generally remain in deferral while you continue your education as well. So, in that sense, yes, you can afford it. And in addition to things like RA and TA support, some students also manage to get their own funding, for example, through a fellowship that they applied for individually. One example that I'd like to highlight that, like often, maybe 2 or 3 of our genetics PhD students a year get this, is the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship program, or GRFP. And, for you kind of ultra overachievers out there, I don't know who you are, but you can even apply now, and it doesn't count against you later. You can apply, I think, like once as an undergraduate, and then once in your first year or 2 of being a graduate student. And so, you get kind of a free swing at this if you want it. And if you get it, it covers your funding as a graduate student for 3 years. And so, that's a pretty cool situation. At least for living in Madison, it's a pretty nice stipend. It's more than our own students generally get. And it can also entail some greater freedom in terms of your research directions. But I do have to emphasize that this takes, some work to apply for. You have to write a personal statement. You have to write a research proposal. It's only a couple pages, but still. And that has to be, like you're writing this as if you're going to work with a certain lab. It should probably be a lab that's not at UW. And so you need to be in touch with someone about that. And probably they write a letter, but you probably also need letters of recommendation from at least a couple of the same people who would write them for your PhD applications. So, this I think is mainly relevant if you're thinking to go directly on to graduate school. I don't think you can defer it if you want to do something else first. Not that I'm aware of. Yes.
Would the acceptance come before the papers?
No.
Oh, so you couldn't use it.
You
as
will
like
not
a-
know at the time you apply. The acceptance, the notification of whether you get it doesn't come until like March. And yet, I have heard of cases where getting that basically changed an admissions decision.
Like for the better? or-
Yes, for the better.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Like maybe the program didn't have funding to bring this extra student. But if they had their own funding, then they were welcome. I have heard of that. So it certainly doesn't hurt. So this takes some work, to go through all the necessary steps, but it is something you could decide to do if you have time.
I have one other question. to
Sure.
ask.
Mhm.
I know that, all right, I heard that funding generally comes from the lab. That you get into, lab kind of has the funding.
In many fields, that is the case. But like depending on the field you're in, like in maybe your typical ecology lab, they might not have a grant that can fund you. Scientific funding is very unequal across fields in this country, especially because we have the NIH, which is actually pretty well funded. And it even funds, a lot of basic science, like I do evolutionary genetics in a model organism. NIH funds me. I'm really happy about that. But outside the NIH, there's only, certain areas, like maybe like plant genomics that are well funded. And in the broader spectrum, like, NSF is not that well funded. So it depends on the area you're in. And the more, in the more molecular biosciences, that is the typical situation is that you join a lab that, has convinced the program that they have funding to support you during your PhD. And most students, most of the time, are supported through grants that their lab has. So, that's true in my lab, and that's true in, most kind of molecular and biomedical programs out there, I would say. Mhm.
Like if we, let's just, for the sake of the question, kind of just like assuming that that's the case, like if labs are funded and you have rotation as well, like do all of those rotation labs need to have proven that they can fund somebody? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, that's a good question.
or do you like find three?
That probably varies from program to program. In general, if a professor doesn't feel like they will have the funding to take the student, they won't take a rotation student either. And if, likewise, if a professor doesn't think that this student is really going to want to join their lab, they'd rather not take them because with a rotation, the professor is probably like, putting in more than they're getting out. They're not a whole lot's going to get done in that time realistically. And there's a lot of, kind of training effort and a lot of interaction, that needs to happen there. So generally it's only faculty that have funding who would want to take a rotation student. But then the way it works, at least in our program, is that when the student goes to join a lab after the rotations, there's kind of an extra step where, the program asks the professor to fill out this form, explaining where the funding would be coming from. They want to make sure at least the next few years are locked in. Now, realistically, if a PhD takes 6 years and I'm looking at a student who would be, joining halfway through their first year, there's no realistic way that I can know for certain what my funding situation is going to look like 5.5 years from now, because grants are not more than 5 years. But, they want to see at least that the first few years are securely funded. And if there's an issue after that, then, different things might happen. There might be an opportunity to serve as a TA to get one's funding, or there might be other sort of fallback options.
Do you feel like that? Sorry, this will be my last question.
No
Do you
problem.
feel like that should inform our search for school or specific programs? Like, should the homework be done as far as like reaching out? You should have contacted and sort of confirmed that at least like three PIs in your field are in that program that you'd be interested in rotating in. And it seems like maybe
That is an ideal question. Yeah, and we will cover exactly that in short order during this unit. I think that's what you just said is actually a really good principle. It's nice if there's, if you're looking at rotation type programs, then it's really nice if there's at least a few people who would be appealing to rotate with, in case weird things happen, in case you just don't, really get along with the person you thought you were most interested in working with, or, a professor unexpectedly leaves that university, different things can happen. And even if you're not looking at rotation programs, it's nice to see that there's like a little cluster of research groups with mutually relevant interests, that you'd have some appealing members of your PhD committee, which is often made up of roughly 5 professors. So that is often a good principle, but yeah, we will delve further into that. In terms of like what to ask about when you're inquiring with potential advisors, I usually don't get students like directly asking about my funding situation. To some that might seem a little overly forward, but I definitely get students asking me whether I would consider taking a student next year, and often a primary determinant of that is my funding situation. Was there a question over here? Oh, okay. Yes. Mhm. It is a two-way decision. I think that it's the way it works in our program is that those faculty that are especially interested in recruiting a student will volunteer to give a rotation talk, like a little blurb about their research that the new students will hear. And they can ask other faculty too that didn't choose to give a rotation talk if they're accepting rotation students, and maybe some of them are and some of them aren't, maybe often for funding reasons if they're not. But I think, among the faculty that are interested in taking students, they probably tend to be interested in, in accepting the rotators that want to rotate with them. There might be a handful of exceptions, if a professor really has very specific ideas about like what background or skills they want new students to have, but usually that's not the case. So, I think, conditional on faculty being open to taking a student, it's probably mostly the students who end up, deciding where they want to rotate. And then, the rotation is really a two-way trial period as well. And so, I would say again, probably most rotations end with the faculty being potentially interested in accepting that student, conditional on that rotation having happened at all. But not all. Sometimes the faculty member might decide that they're not interested, either because they weren't happy with how the rotation went. I can only think of one time that's happened to me, in the decade or so I've been here. Or maybe something about their funding situation changed, like maybe it's become clear that, like their current, senior PhD students are taking longer than they'd hoped, and they're going to need to, save their funding for them. Or their grant proposal that they were hoping might get funded did not get funded. So, those things can happen. But yeah, I'd say it's probably a little bit more on the student's choice. Question up here? Mm-hmm. It is mostly a set number for each particular program. I think occasionally there might be a little latitude to go above that. You could end up above it, like if you get a special fellowship or some kind of award that includes a cash award. You generally should not you shouldn't ever end up below the amount that a program lays out there. Occasionally you might end up above for reasons like the ones I mentioned, or, maybe if a professor has, 4 students from program A, but 1 student from program B stipend is a little lower, but the professor says, I want all the students in my lab to get the same thing. I want to pay my student from program B the same as my students from program A. I've seen that happen. I've done that myself. But yeah, it should be largely pretty uniform. Yes. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned alongside funding, stuff like health insurance. Is that something that's usually included in funding as well?
Yes, that should be covered. Yes. I want to make sure I get through the rest of my slides. It's dawning on me that perhaps my computer's battery is not in the same condition that it was the last time I taught, because it's warning me here. So I think I'll have to bring my adapter from here on out. Okay. I want to make sure I get through these last few slides and then we'll go back to questions. I mentioned that, a PhD like this is mostly about research. That's most of what's involved. And one question you might have is, well, how much research, like, how do you decide when you're done? And that varies, and the same standard cannot really apply across the board. In my own lab, I tell students that I'm looking for something like 3 first author papers or equivalent. I say or equivalent because really, occasionally there might be a paper that is as substantial as 2 typical papers, and it just made sense to publish it that way. Or, we might be dealing with maybe a couple different co-first author publications where it was more of a team effort. So it's not a rigid standard, but it's kind of a general benchmark in my own field. But probably, my colleagues from other fields of genetics even would not even share that standard. And, in another lab, it might be totally enough to have like, 1 strong first author publication and graduate with that. So that varies. But, more broadly, I would say the expectation is, that to get a PhD, that you've really learned how to do research first and foremost, in a largely independent manner, and that you've gained a really thorough understanding of your own research field. I think those are core expectations across the board. And I wanted to say a little bit, about kind of transitioning from an undergraduate mindset to a PhD student mindset. And maybe some of you have already started this process. So, but as an undergraduate, by and large, the expectations here are that you primarily do coursework. So you follow instructions, you do a good job on the assignments, and you get good grades. All right. Being a PhD student is nothing like that. I mentioned that coursework is a much lesser portion of what you do. Instead, you're primarily doing research. And really, the key to being a successful PhD student is to become increasingly self-directed as you go along. So in other words, you need to figure out what you need to do next in your research and in your career development more broadly. Your advisor will try to help you, but it's not really their job to tell you everything that you need to do next in your project and more broadly. So you need to figure out, what to do next, and, who you should talk to learn more about your project or about your career options. You need to figure out what papers, you should be reading to make sure you're doing your research in the best way. Your advisor and others will try to help with all these things, but really what we're looking for and what will make things go better is, for you to take an increasingly prominent role in kind of, piloting your own scientific development and research progress. And so the last thing I want to say is just, I want to emphasize that what you get out of graduate school depends very strongly on what you put in. And so, this kind of goes hand in hand with the sort of self-direction that I'm talking about. If you do just enough to get a PhD, you will get a PhD and hopefully some kind of relevant job. But, if you put in more effort, if you learn more, if you get more done, then you will have a lot more options to choose from after you leave graduate school. So that's all I've got for today. I'm amazed that the timing worked out. Please be patient with me when it doesn't. So I mentioned the survey. Hi, computer. I mentioned the, hopefully that means the recording's okay. Anybody know what happens when your computer dies during a Zoom recording? I was recording it to my computer as well, so we'll see. Yeah, what I was going to say there, the survey is due by next week. You're supposed to have at least scheduled your faculty conversation by the week after.